everyone, and welcome to Gaming Mechanics, a podcast that seeks to explore the unexplored topics in games, how they work, and why we love them. I am your host, Mark, and with me here live, with no special anonymous name because there was no need for electronic communication.
Oh, that's a good point.
Is Greg.
Woohoo! We're in my apartment. Mark came home for the holidays, kind of, and I still live near where he used to live. It doesn't matter.
Yes, Greg lives
Mark's
near
here.
my parents.
Yeah.
So, home for the holidays means home with Greg.
Heck, yes it does. So, there's almost literally no difference to this podcast other than the fact that Mark and I are sitting next to each other instead of...
It's actually way more different for us than it is for you.
It is, yeah. We were like super excited and then realized it actually doesn't really matter. So. But it's been a sec since we've been here.
Yeah, it has. It's been about a week and a half, maybe. Yeah, so
almost 2.
Yeah, about 2 weeks since we've done our last episode.
Apologies for that. That was due in large part to myself and poor planning, and the craziness of the holidays.
Yes.
So we will we'll be back to our regular schedule come the new year. And speaking of the new year, we're not going to be finishing Undertale, obviously, before the new year. That's something we will continue to do though and finish. But we do want to continue our discussion / wrap up our discussion of the end of games. And one easy way to do that was we were just thinking about endgames in general, particularly, it kind of first thought about MMOs or multiplayer games, but basically everything post the end of the story. So when you normally say, hey, I beat the game, then there tends to be a lot more game after that, which is bizarre and very interesting.
Yeah. It's really strange that we call that, like, the end game. Like, you have the end of the game, and then you have the end game. In fact, it's funny, I was having a conversation with my little brother about Custom Robo. I was taking an inventory of all the games that I have played, and I was marking out whether or not I had completed them, or finished at least the storyline. And I said that I hadn't finished that one. I was still on this one really hard part. And my brother was like, no, you finished the story. That was the post game. I was like, what? It was so seamless. Like, the way that they led from the story into the post game was like, if you would have blinked, you missed it.
Well, just the idea that there is a post game, I think, is... Originally, I figured that would be something kind of new as a way to kind of keep... We've talked on this show before about how there's this bizarre kind of feeling with developers to... Or at least... desire to keep you playing indefinitely,
right?
And there's some reasons for that, but I don't think we've quite come to a reason why it would be that powerful a force that it seems to be. But that being said, I kind of figured it might be a new thing, and it's really not actually. At least going back to my early stages of gaming, and even a little bit before that, that was it's been I think all the way back to the original Crash Bandicoot or kind of those early platformers. It tended to be they would reflect it in the game save files where you would beat the game, you finish the story, you beat everything, and it'd be like at 80%. And like a true completion wasn't 100%, it was like 117% for Crash 3, for example. Or like some arbitrary like 130%, and that was like the correct, then you finally actually beat it, which is so bizarre.
130% was the max?
Well, 117 was, I remember, that was Crash 3.
Okay.
Crash Warped. But it's just bizarre lines to draw. So it does go back at least 20, 30 years. To the early 90s.
Oh, yeah. I think I remember reflecting on just recently on my Donkey Kong Country experience. And, like, my favorite games, they got me into video games. They got me into game design. Like, love those games to death.
Yeah.
And realized that I had not played all of the lost levels and haven't, like, 110%ed all the... I think you can 102% Donkey Kong Country 3 or something like that. Sure. And like I haven't 100%ed them. And there's so many levels you actually don't have to play in Donkey Kong Country.
Which is interesting, and this is another topic we'll get to in a second. I think this is kind of more intro, but the growth and acquisition of the achievement and trophy systems. I wonder if that plays into the same thing we're talking about, where you can beat a game, but then you can also 100% a game, and that's a very separate thing.
Yeah.
But even past that, there's like before trophies existed, that post game still existed. Trophies just kind of gave more structure to it, you know.
Yeah.
Now basically, if you get all the trophies, you've literally probably done everything in the game. And the other games, before the trophy achievement system, you could beat the game, but you still had all these things to do. You just didn't get quote unquote trophies for it.
Yeah, actually, Donkey Kong Country is a great example of that. Sure. Like in the original Donkey Kong Country, you got 100%. You could 100% the game if you visited every bonus level. Now, you going to the bonus level didn't give you anything other than extra lives, extra bananas, but the game kept track of where you had been.
Right.
And once you had been to all of them, you 100%ed the game. Now, they changed this, and in my opinion, they fixed this in Donkey Kong Country 2. They give you a collectible at the end of every bonus.
Right,
So that you actually knew that you were collecting something, and you knew how many coins you needed in order to unlock the next lost level.
Yeah.
It's an interesting system they had.
They actually gave you some sort of progression instead of just literally like being there and then
it just kind of keeps track behind
checking
the scenes.
the box. Yeah. Interesting.
It made it a bit more obvious.
So anyway, all that is to say, endgames seem to exist. So we'll backtrack here for a second. The reason we started talking about this was MMOs, right? Massively multiplayer online games tend to, in fact, in large part, people talk about. I was going to touch on grinding and why that's kind of a thing in games that might actually be necessary. And not necessarily bad. It gets a really bad rep, particularly right now with the whole microtransactions controversies and kind of the state of gaming right now. But I think grinding at its core isn't necessarily a bad thing. Anyway, point is, with MMOs, the kind of realization came about, one, the term endgame is a thing for that. People always ask about the end games. Right now, Destiny 2 is a big one, and talk about that. Obviously, any World of Warcraft expansion is pretty much judged by its end game as opposed to its leveling. And it's just fascinating that, right, like you even the numerical way to keep track of how you're doing, which is like your levels.
Right.
The game actually starts when you reach max level. Like when you beat everything, then you begin playing the game, or like properly, right? Which is a bizarre backwards thing. And I wonder with MMOs particularly, like why, like it's just arbitrary at that point, right? Or you see things like in Destiny, you reach level cap, and then you get gear levels, right? Eye level. Same thing in World of Warcraft. You reach level cap, and then you judge yourself against other people at max level by the level of your gear. So there is still this progression that happens, but we arbitrarily kind of capped it at that original EXP, the thing that you're normally trying to do throughout the leveling process.
You shift from something that is, I guess, experience-based, just like killing enemies gives you experience, to something like item levels, where the focus becomes much more on gear. Like, in fact, that's the only way to advance.
That might be actually it for MMOs, right? That after the XP thing, they just the only thing to do. Like Guild Wars 2 is famously less about the item grind or the item treadmill as much as about cosmetics, but it's still acquiring items. It's still acquiring discrete things that you can't have otherwise, that you don't just get for doing things like experience is.
And I think that's actually kind of a good design in MMOs because it forces players to explore and do like more end game things. Like in order to get experience for a lot of games, you can just keep killing the same monster over and over again. And that's so in order to force players to expand their view of the world and their experience of the game that you've made, you force them to collect these rare items.
Right. And well, the other interesting thing too is that there's with endgame stuff. One, with MMOs, endgame stuff tends to be the most difficult stuff, as well as it tends to be grouped. Right. You can't do a lot of current endgame stuff solo.
That's true.
So there's a bizarre thing that gets talked about, or maybe not bizarre, but this thing gets talked about with endgame content, is that you have a whole group of people who are probably the minority of hardcore raiders, people that form guilds and groups and are super social and do that with multiple people, and want content that's tailored to them. Particularly for the MMO style of play, there's not a whole lot of mechanical, like if you're soloing content, it's hard to be better at soloing content as an MMO player than other people, right? You kind of learn your rotation, and then from there, it's not too hard. You hit the buttons in the right order.
Yeah, unless your MMO is like really technical.
Right, like Guild Wars 2 is, again, like maybe slightly different, where there's a whole lot of, they try to do a little bit more motion and movement-based stuff. But like in general, I'm just thinking about WoW. You get down the right gear and the right rotation, and you're pretty much set.
Right.
It's in raids and in group content where you actually need a lot more skill, and that comes out where you're able to communicate, you're able to move, you're able to be doing the right things at the right time, which just is a different design. Anyway, point is, it's very interesting that MMOs seem to be forced into this kind of social group thing for people that are going to be playing end game content, or rather max level content. When a lot of people actually, the majority of people by far, don't do that, right? The mass majority of MMO players will only play single player content and don't use any of the social stuff.
It's true.
So it's very interesting that the very vocal minority becomes the ones that actually get to determine the entire content of the game post-release.
Yeah.
That That's really interesting to me.
There's such a dramatic.
It's like a huge amount of developer resource. That's like money that the developers are spending based on just what these people want.
And these people have got, to your point, these people have an exceptional experience of the end in the end game.
Right.
Like it's not,
Right.
it isn't at all like the game. I guess to we can separate out game from end game.
Right.
The
It's so
pre-game. I don't know what to
bizarre
call
that
it.
we're even having to draw that line.
But there's a real shift between a grind that's alone, a solo grind, to a collective treasure hunt.
Right. Yeah.
Like that's kind of what it becomes at the end is you have to do stuff in a group and you're looking for really rare items. Just killing any monster will not get you closer to a higher item level.
Right. Well, I think, and to the difference with MMOs, at least at the beginning, it makes sense why this endgame idea came about. Well, this was here before MMOs, so I don't think we can trace the genesis back to MMOs. But at least with MMOs, it makes sense to me. Like, MMOs, when they were subscription-based, they were designed to be played indefinitely, too, right? They're supposed to be kind of like forever games. They were supposed to be like, hey, you finish it, and then you're done with the MMO. Like, you can't beat an MMO.
Right.
By design. So to keep people engrossed in that fantasy, in that world, in large part, the role-playing games, it makes sense to need a continual, replayable, ad nauseum amount of content. Particularly for people, like, again, there's people that will be able to finish all of the content, an entire expansion of WoW in 2 days.
Right.
And that's, again, not the majority of people, but you do have these people that will be grinding this stuff and will have beaten everything within several days of content that should last like months.
Right.
So that's a real problem for developers. So it makes sense that you needed to design this weird kind of post-game, okay, here's what you do when you're done with the game sort of thing for all the people that want to stick around, especially if it's subscription-based, which a lot of MMOs were at the beginning.
Right.
You need some reason to keep on giving them money.
Right. And keep retaining players for MMOs. That is not hard to understand.
Right. That one makes sense.
You retain players because that's where your money's from.
Right. Exactly.
Other
be
games.
Be it subscription or microtransactional. I mean, either way, it's just...
Yeah, you have to have people playing your game in order to make money.
Exactly.
And because MMOs, you've got to run servers and things like that.
Right,
You have a maintenance cost.
Decent amount of maintenance cost there. So that's interesting. But like, why were there? I mean, so like the idea of like secret levels or like post like end game stuff, right? Like, why? I wonder how that came about. I mean, did it just start as Easter eggs basically from developer? Like, you go way back to like like arcade games with like Pac-Man or like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle games from the 90s. That's a little bit post. Or like secret characters in Mortal Kombat, the original, or Street Fighter. That were just kind of rumors. This is pre-internet era, right? That programmers would put in. I think it was just in large part for fun then. Like it wasn't the point. I think that was far more just a time where it was developers had a little bit more, I don't know, fun, dare I say? Like
Yeah.
it was less corporate maybe. At some
that's
level, it was
fair.
less of a huge thing, and the guys that were doing it were a pretty unique group of dudes who probably had a sense of humor because they were nerds. You know? Like,
No, I think that's fair. And
I wonder if there's part of that there.
we're seeing more of a resurgence of indie gaming, which I really do appreciate. But I do think that it was more just, it wasn't the expectation.
Yeah,
like
sure.
it wasn't the norm to like put fun Easter eggs in your game.
Totally.
But some people did, and those became really popular, and it became a big deal. Like, have you unlocked this one particular character in Mortal Kombat that is hard to get? And people would talk about it, and it became a really good way to get people talking about your game.
Totally, and for the arcade experience, it was super social, right? It was a very, I mean, that was some. I'm at the very tail end of that generation that can remember that. But I do remember being a kid, particularly at my brother's indoor soccer games. So we had an arcade, so I would go not watch my brother, and be at the arcade. And there was, I forget what it was. It was bizarre. It was a game. Drop a line if anyone remember this game. It was a game. It was an Eastern like Japanese fighter, 3D. It wasn't Tekken, and the whole thing was basically each character could transform into like an animal version of themselves.
Okay.
And like a anthropomorphized version of an animal.
Interesting.
And that was the big thing. So anyway, that I loved that game and I sucked at it, and you sucked at all the games. And there would be sometimes where one guy, right, who could beat it and come in and literally I remember crowds of kids would watch him and then get to watch the game. Like, I don't know what happens after the second or third fight
Because you
I
could
could
never get
make it
there.
far.
Yeah.
So like I'd never even seen some of these characters before that he was fighting, and then certainly if there was a boss, I'd never even thought about boss. Like, and it was so cool, and he was so good, and I had no idea how he was so good. It was this wonderful social thing where these kids were just gathered around this guy. Like it was a very, very cool thing. Basically, is all that has to say. So arcade games like live off that sort of thing. So if there was some point of like, hey, there's this different shader for the original Mortal Kombat, I think it might have been Reptile with a green shader of Scorpion, or Sub-Zero, one of the ninjas, and like that would have been a huge like thing that would have like kind of been spread like word of mouth through the arcade. Like, hey, have you heard like the secret like green version of the game? Like, what? That's not a real thing. Like, is it a real thing?
So
like,
then you play the game and you try to find out.
Exactly. And that's like in arcade games lived and died off that sort of word of mouth thing. So it makes sense why that would be there for them.
Right.
But then I think about like some of the PlayStation 1 games I play a lot, like Crash Bandicoot, Spyro the Dragon,
Jak and Daxter.
Yep, Jak and Daxter. Well, that's PS2, but early PS2. Yeah. And those games were the same way. Like early Crash Bandicoot, you'd beat the game, you'd finish the story, and then it would open up. There'd be a new world that was like the secret world, and you had to do things to unlock the levels in that world. But like you were immediately shown that there was more game to play.
Right. Which I think is so cool. It adds like such a mysteriousness.
I remember loving that. Yeah.
Like I remember me and a friend playing Final Fantasy VII, and like there's the two major weapons, Emerald and Ruby, that are sort of the secret bosses in that game.
Right.
And there was because it was a pretty early age of the internet, there was such a mystique to the idea that there might actually be another weapon hidden around in the game, and like, or there might be some other secret awesome weapon that you can unlock or find. And, and it's a big enough game where it just seemed plausible that like I bet there's something that nobody's found yet.
Yeah, totally.
And that just made us want to keep playing and exploring, even though we were done with the game.
Well, and to answer our question earlier, at least when we were talking about like why do developers want to retain players, now with the internet age, there's some very, very plausible reasons. But back then, why would they even bother with that?
Yeah, I think it was just fun. I mean, it's sort of
Is there some level of like developer pride? Do you think it's just the fact that there was some just love to the craft they want to put in? I don't believe at that point it was the super corporate like brilliant like marketing strategy like now people will be talking about this and they'll be able to buy we'll sell X more copies because of this word of mouth thing.
I think some of it is like
maybe they did, but
people only bought so many games and they wanted more game to play, basically. Like kind of the same argument that you could give toward people putting just random stuff in the newspapers in the early 1900s. It was like that, or like in the early 1900s, maybe late 1800s, like that was what people had to read for the day.
Yeah, that's all they
so
had,
like you wanted to fill that thing from cover to cover because that was what people were reading.
Yeah.
And I think in some ways that applied to early gaming. Like there wasn't a new game that came out every day. Like now there basically is a new game every day.
Well, certainly with the rise of Steam and that
indie
stuff,
games,
they're literally, I mean, I forgot what the numbers were. 2017 saw the release of something like 2,500 games.
Yeah,
which is obscene.
So,
I mean, it's obscene.
Multiple per day.
You can't even think. I can't list 2,500 games. Period.
Yeah, exactly. And they all. Yeah.
And there are 2,500 new ones this year.
Just this year.
So. So yeah, no, that's an interesting point. That particularly before the industry was kind of ballooned into its current multi-hundred millions of dollars, kind of probably there in the mid-hundred. I feel like Halo really blew up as the first huge gaming. Maybe that's not entirely true. Mortal Kombat was big too, but like Halo is like people who didn't play games knew what Halo was, right?
That's
like
true.
that was cross cultural. When I remember when Halo 3 came out, like people skipped school that day.
Yeah, I do remember that.
I actually had two friends that did that.
That's great.
So anyway, point is, it might have been different before that, right? Where it was not this huge market, and each release did need to have more, and there was a level of pride put into it. I don't want to just be like, oh, the good old days were just better in every way, and back when everyone had hearts of gold. Like, no, it was still a business, but
right.
I don't know. At the same time, I do feel like it was before a significant amount of this whole corporatization and I mean, frankly, greed kind of crept its way into the industry and allowed for a lot more creativity.
Well, I think that
reason to put Easter eggs in. Like, what past AAA game has had any Easter egg? Can you think of in the past 3 years?
I mean, there definitely are games with Easter eggs.
I know. No. I'm gonna bite my words here.
Yeah,
I'm just thinking like Battlefront and Shadow War and like.
Yeah, those games definitely have a more serious tone, much less likely to have Easter eggs.
Call of Duty. I don't know.
I know that I want to say there are Easter eggs in Overwatch, but I don't remember what they are right offhand.
I think there's tons of references in Overwatch
Yeah.
to different lore pieces and whatnot, and certainly to different Blizzard games. There's tons of those. But
Yeah.
anyway, let's.
I do,
sorry, go on.
and this is going to be. We'll just be on this briefly, but I do think that this is a tendency in markets in general, like when they're newly sort of spawning, and it's just sort of the R&D phase where people are trying
Yeah,
stuff
sure.
and trying to figure out, can we make this work? Can this be a viable business? And they're in it not for the money, because they love what they do, and they want to do this.
Yeah, and want to see if it actually could. Be a
And then
thing.
people who with a lot of money take notice. They see it as a good investment,
Yeah.
and then it becomes more about the bottom line than it becomes about the craft.
And that's been true of almost any.
Yeah,
big piece
all
of art
markets work that
yeah,
way.
you know.
Like
Yeah.
it's, and that happens to software, that happens to cars. I mean, it happens to
Yeah,
everything.
yeah.
But I do like the resurgence of indie games for the reason that it moves. I think it puts the development back into the people who just love what they're doing.
Yeah, for sure. I read again, this is just kind of a side. Actually, I just watched a video today about the rise and fall of Bungie specifically as a developing team, and in large part, they started in the early '90s, way before Halo. Actually, they put out a bunch of games I'd never even heard of before Marathon, and a bunch of kind of low key crummy ones But they were just they were just a couple guys. I think it was a guy, a senior in college, was when it started with their president, and then obviously went through and then did Halo, signed with Microsoft, and that was a phenomenon. And then they left Microsoft when they left Halo, and went to Activision, a very well known piece of shit. At that point, and then Destiny went pretty downhill. So anyway, I think I agree that narrative seems to make sense a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see. Let's go into I don't know. There's a couple things we could talk about. Like just there's tons of other things that seem to have gotten introduced in the mid 2000s, late 2000s, like the whole idea of New Game Plus, which is fascinating, where your end game is just your game again. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a corollary of usually another thing you see in a lot of single player games, right? Is you beat the game on any level, and then, or maybe even you beat it on the hardest level, and then you get a harder level again.
Right.
Which is also interesting because again, that's just the game with a scaler.
Yeah, exactly.
And a lot of people don't even like a good example of that's actually Halo, right? With legendary runs, it becomes a different game almost, right? You don't play the game in the same way. You find the most efficient weapon, and you play it like you would play CS:GO, where you're corner peeking and
exactly
trying to make every shot count, and it totally kills the whole flow of the game. And
you're
it's
really
a fun
good
challenge.
at banking grenades off of weird surfaces.
Yeah, exactly. You solve every single map and have to have a perfect run pretty much through it, or you lose.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an interesting. That seems like the easiest way for a developer in some ways to get more mileage out of the game. It's like, okay, here's a harder version.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, here's the same. We
thing.
literally don't have to make any more content.
Yeah.
We just multiply everything by 2 and you go again.
Yeah.
And
scale you down and them up, and then see if you can do it now. Take that.
One of my favorite New Game Plus experiences was with probably my second favorite, maybe my favorite. It's in the running for my for RPGs.
Okay.
Tales of Symphonia. That I played on the GameCube.
Okay.
And that has a New Game Plus mode after you finish. But during the game you collect something called grade when you win. And then you can spend that grade in the grade store in your New Game Plus to get upgrades to your New Game Plus. So you can get 10 times experience, and you just blow
really?
through the game. You
Interesting.
can get keep all of your items from your previous game, so you
Right.
start with just
Right.
the best weapons.
Yeah.
You can keep all of your unlocked moves. You can keep your levels.
That's a really interesting dynamic. Most of the time, the New Game Plus will have a very set, hey, these are the things you get to keep as you go into the new game, and it's harder, but you get to keep these things, and you have no control over it, and you just go.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really interesting idea to give the players some control over how the New Game Plus is going to work.
Yeah. Yeah, and I actually played that game twice through just because their New Game Plus was so compelling.
It was so fun.
And I didn't get the secret awesome super weapons the first time around, so I played through it again, and I played through it with I think 5 times EXP.
Yeah.
So it was a lot faster, and I could get to the part where I would unlock the secret weapons.
Yeah, the big weapons.
And because that's what I just wanted to do that.
Plus, that's a fascinating thing too, right? We're talking about, again, usually we'll blow up, but again, now you're talking about the game in a far more meta sense, which is not confined to the single player, the story that is told. It's completely removed from the story at this point. You're now thinking of ways outside to get the things that you want in the game in multiple playthroughs,
Right.
with modifiers that you can get by playing the game more. Like it's very
meta.
You're solving a puzzle at that point. You're playing a meta game to play the game.
Right.
Which I feel like we come to that theme a lot, but that's just really interesting, but that's really fun. That's really compelling. That's really interesting, and very it spurs creativity, and it's legitimate player choice, right? There's tons of ways to do it depending on how you want to do it, and so that's really interesting. Because like most new game pluses tend to be you play it on harder difficulty, and you keep most of the skills, or usually like action games or semi RPGs, where you get to keep everything that you had at the end of your first playthrough. You just go to, and now there's like, for example, in the Arkham games, Arkham Asylum and Arkham City and Arkham Knight, the New Game Plus mode will usually start. There's puzzles that you can solve with certain gadgets that they won't give you. Like you'll get pretty much everything in all your upgrades, but there'll be certain gadgets you don't get that would be like puzzle solving gadgets until that point in the normal story. Otherwise, you could like break the game, right? Actually, you can do that in Arkham Asylum. There's some points where you get to keep something too early, and you can use it to literally glitch out the game, and it just freezes because it doesn't know what to do with the fact that you're there. Yeah, because you're not supposed to be yet. But so that's how most new game pluses go. And in general, I don't know. It seems, at least for me, I tend to not do the super hard difficulty ones because, like I said, it tends to be learning a new game, and it tends to be certainly less fun and more tedious.
Yeah, I would agree.
New game pluses I almost always play because it is a legitimately different experience to get to go through the game again with all the stuff that you worked so hard to get. It gives you a sense of accomplishment that you actually earned these things, right? It's not just like you get them, then you get to play it again with like, just arbitrarily stronger weapons.
Yeah.
No, like you get all the stuff that you bought and earned, and as well as usually the games will be scaled so that you couldn't get everything the first time, so now you can go back through and actually get the rest.
Everything. That's my favorite thing.
So I actually love those types of games. I really enjoy that.
I don't think I've played a game where they just had like a super deep tech tree that you just couldn't get through in your first playthrough, and you could just keep your progress and start over, and things would, I don't know, maybe they would scale it in some way so you couldn't just blow through again. Right. But then, like, you could continue down the tech tree just to see what there was.
Yeah, totally.
I think that would be compelling.
Yeah, and that's, I think, like I said, I feel like that's a lot of either, I'm thinking of like, more linear games like Arkham, or I'm thinking in other games like, actually a really fantastic series is the Infamous series by Sucker Punch. The guys that did Sly Cooper. They transitioned to a very, very different type of game, but Infamous is a superhero action, open world-ish type of game where you play a character who is entirely uncompelling in every way, shape, and form as a character, but he has lightning powers, which is really cool. So, and they just nailed the movement, and the combat is just top notch, and the design, and it's very clever. But that's a similar thing with open world games, like think Skyrim, right? Like we were talking about this, right? Where like the main quest in Skyrim is a punchline. It's not even a like, oh, you guys should really take a seat. Like no one gives a shit about Alduin. I never finished it, and I played that like game, I don't know, 50, 60 hours. So
which is plenty of time to finish that story.
Oh, easy. Oh yeah, for sure. I'm sure if you blew through that, it'd be like a 20-hour game tops, maybe. I don't even know. But it's very interesting that you have these built-in things where if a game is kind of open world or far more I don't know, player freedom-y, where you can just kind of do things outside of the story.
Player freedom-y.
Yeah, that'll be the quote of the night.
Open, and more of an open concept.
No, I'm sorry, I just thought of the phrase we came up with. We just came from the bar. I'll be honest. Well, we're doing a slightly buzzed.
We had a good time.
It was nice.
We played a game about puns.
Oh yeah, that was fun. Saw some old friends. But anyway, I totally lost.
That's okay.
I'm so sorry. It's all right.
All right. So I think it's an interesting question of like, there's a common theme in end games is to have the player go through a grind.
Oh yeah, let's talk about this.
So like going through there, I remember the Wind Waker. There's I think it's Pit of 100 Trials or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it's called, but
Xander could tell us. That's
you
his favorite
fight through floors of enemies, and there's like I think 50 floors or something.
Oh, sure, that
some
sort of.
ridiculous number of floors.
Yeah.
And you can fight all the way through
Yeah,
this.
let's talk about that.
And Super Paper Mario has a thing where you fight through 100 different enemies.
Yeah, a big.
Pokemon started having it where you can do the Elite Four again.
That's basically a thing in the Arkham games where you have challenges, God of War, Darksiders 2, which I'm playing right now, which is fantastic, and you should all play. Has the exact same thing. It's called the Crucible. Ratchet and Clank had the same thing in its gladiatorial arenas.
So that's a really interesting thing. I remember as a kid playing Golden Sun, and after you beat the game, there's a challenge mode where you just beat enemies one after the other.
Yeah.
And I loved seeing how many I could beat in a row.
Yeah, it's like Smash with the boss runs, right? You have to go through and beat all the bosses.
Yeah.
And see how far you can get.
And I think maybe there's just something fun about that as like somebody who's spent all this time collecting these powers and these abilities and honing these characters to then see like just how far can you get with what you've done.
Totally. And I think part of that too is we've talked about like what the game is, like capital G, you know, like what's the game? Like how you find the game. And most of the time the game is at least with story-based games, will be interspaced. You're not always doing the game, right? You're usually doing stuff like there's narrative or there's cutscenes. You're going to a place or you're moving or you're doing something that makes sense because you're not always fighting or doing the thing that the game is. Like again, I'll use the Arkham example because I know this game so well. But if the game capital G is either doing puzzles, doing combat, or doing the Predator missions, there's got to be something in between where you're moving around and you're getting between these things, right? And so a lot of times those challenge modes will be, again, like the game just super distilled, where you're just doing that thing in a way that you can't really do in the story because it would be too much,
right?
In large part, or at least it's just at least far more. It's just very artificial, right? It's just like the ultimate version of that, which is interesting because in that way you can actually. I would maintain that you can still do that within the bounds of a story if you're clever enough. And some games like God of War 2 actually does that fantastically, where some of the hardest parts of that game aren't necessarily the challenges, but are in fact the end of the game when you're trying to get to Clotho. That's a horrible mission. But the point is that basically in large part it'd probably be a lot easier to put those most ultimate versions of the mechanics of the game in just kind of really arbitrary challenge modes.
Right.
It'd be a lot easier to do that than try to work a narrative function into them.
Right. Because it would be weird if you had enemies that were like harder than some bosses.
Right, exactly.
Like it would totally break the
And the
flow.
scaling wouldn't make any sense, to an extent too, or why coming up with an in-story reason why you're fighting all these different enemies from different areas or different times and going into it like that is very difficult. So
it seems to me like if the final boss and the final levels are sort of a final exam on the mechanics, ideally. I realize that's not the case in some games.
Right.
But in theory, it should sort of be a final exam of your mastery of this game and its mechanics. I would say the end game is sort of almost like a celebration of your mastery.
Sure.
You can now just play with your ability to use Kratos really well and know all of his moves.
Yeah.
Or in a Pokemon game to have leveled up your Pokemon to this crazy levels and taught them all these good moves
and then find Mewtwo and
Right.
actually use them against him. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, it's the end of the interesting, at least with the God of War games, which is another series I'm very familiar with, in large part. So you can actually unlock, a lot of times you can unlock those challenges as you play the story, but you can only really do them when you've like fully leveled Kratos all the way up, right? When you've maxed out all of your red orbs on all of your abilities and your magic and your blades. And then you can actually kind of do the challenge stuff. So it is like kind of meant to be this true end game like post. And I wonder, part of it could be, we were talking about, again, this kind of goes back to that desire for developers to maintain player base, but it could just be a large amount of trying to tailor to all kinds of different gamers, right? For the really, really casual ones, they can play the story and be done, and they don't have to touch the challenges, and they're happy. For the mid-tier ones, they can do that and then play the New Game Plus. For the really hardcore ones, they can do that along with the harder difficulty, along with the challenges, so on and so forth. Having that big, huge range of stuff, and hopefully not connecting it like, at least in God of War, beating all the challenges gets you, I think, a skin for Kratos, which is cool, but doesn't change the game too much. Or
Right.
I don't know what like the Wind Waker one is. Darksiders, the same thing. If you beat the Crucible, all 100 levels of it, you get achievement, maybe. maybe a piece of gear. You know, like nothing huge.
Right.
But I think it could be just to try to, particularly for single player games, trying to really appeal to a very large audience and a large basis of people. Because like multiplayer games, people can play against each other who are their skill, right? Matchmaking, you don't have, you can that they just takes into account everyone. But for single player games, you have to take into account how good people are and how much time they want to put in, and make sure everyone feels like they got something out of it. So that's a hard task as a developer. So it makes sense if, you know, again, same thing, we were talking about these challenge modes tends to be probably less developer time and effort too. You're
It's
probably
true.
reusing a lot of assets, kind of just, again, distilling down all the stuff you already did, as opposed to, you know, the main story or the main part of the game. Making new content is probably very resource intensive.
Right.
I think it's just an easy way to give more content to the players.
Yeah, I think you're right. And there's some part of me thinks that these sort of end game grinds are kind of their own reward in a way. Like you're mentioning the rewards for some of those grinds, and like they're okay, but they're not like,
You don't do
oh,
them
this
to
is
unlock
like
that skin. Right?
Exactly.
You do it to say that you beat all the challenge modes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
To say that like you really mastered this game, or
Yeah.
like you just did it because it was a challenge and you wanted to do it.
Yeah.
And I think that harkens much more back to early video games,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
that used to be the whole game actually.
Yeah, that was the
the only reason you played the game at all was to have the pride of playing it.
Yeah, and finish it.
Yeah, to finish it, to have the pride of saying
Or
you
even just get as
completed
far
a
as you
challenge.
can, right? Like no one ever finished Pac-Man,
Right.
when it was first out.
No normal person anyway.
Right. I wonder when the first time Pac-Man got cleared was. Probably didn't take too long. Nerds have been nerds forever.
Well, I think it's interesting that is now relegated to like this smaller part
Yeah,
of the
totally.
game, where like now we know that you beat the game, you completed the story. You're not here for story. You're not really here for items anymore. Like we'll maybe give you an item, but that's not really the biggest thing. Like you just
Yeah.
want a challenge to say that you've beaten it.
It's a very
You
pure
did it.
thing. It's like the point of gaming, right? It's the point of like tests of skill. It's the point of sports, testing yourself against something, beating it, being
Right.
better than it, and that in of itself actually has a very, very high level of internal satisfaction, very intrinsic. Which, by the way, is always better than external satisfaction or external sources of motivation. And if you can get at true intrinsic satisfaction, that is far more powerful motivator in almost any behavioral context.
But I mean, that's so interesting because it flies in the face of all the carrots and sticks that game developers often use to motivate players.
Well,
like,
those are super effective too. It's just
that's true. They are.
I think it's easier to do.
But once all the carrots and sticks are gone, developers still give you things to do, and people do in fact do them.
Yeah,
like
yeah,
they do beat the secret weapons. They do go through those challenges.
Yeah, find every single nook and cranny. Well, here's an interesting. So we've been using actually the term grind. I think maybe a little bit inappropriately.
Fair. Yeah.
We've been talking more. At least in my mind, at least I think of more. What we've been talking about is kind of more those end game like challenge modes or like things to do after the end game or challenge maps in terms of, you know, again I'm thinking God of War has the Trial of the Gods, Arkham series has the challenge maps where you just play the same maps with modifiers on top of them or a set number of things to do in order to get medals or yada yada. I think of grinding as, again, that kind of more MMOE, or even like kind of the collectathons that we've talked about. Again, going back to Spyro, Crash Bandicoot, Croc, to an extent, you know, the Jack and Daxter, Sly Cooper, Ratchet and Clank era as well.
Gex, Glover. You know, all those popular video
Gex?
games. Gex.
Is that a gecko
Enter
game?
the Gecko.
Oh my god, are you serious?
Yes, I'm serious.
I don't remember that. I remember Glover. Was he a lizard?
No, he was a glove.
Oh shit. It was even worse.
That's definitely the quote of the night, though.
Yeah. It was him. I think I remember Gecko then, or Gex.
Yeah.
Was he like a cool, like hip? Like,
Yeah, he was very
yeah,
hip.
yeah,
He was
like
so
very
hip.
cool. Yeah, like 90s cool. And then Glover.
Yeah, Glover was kind
Wow.
of a train wreck, in my opinion.
Was that?
It was a little hard to control.
When was that?
That was
PS1?
N64.
PS2? Okay, N64.
And probably PS as well, PlayStation as well.
Wow, that's remarkable. That's. What point was I making? Okay, yeah, okay.
Collectathons,
So what a
collectathons.
grind means? I think of a grind more as the. Okay, so think like tends to be more multiplayer. Honestly, like I've actually played a lot of Call of Duty Black Ops 2. Actually, like that game a lot. And most big multiplayer online games have just a grind at the end, right? You do the thing, then you get EXP for doing certain things and performing well, and then you get more things for that. And then you prestige, and you go back and do it again, literally, just for the sake of doing it. That's the whole point. Or MMOs is obviously another, that's usually where that's talked about with a grind for gear. But, same thing with action games like Diablo, same thing with, looters like Borderlands or Destiny 2, kind of the shooter looters.
Let's talk about prestiges for a second, because that seems like
That's
a
an
unique
interesting
system.
idea, isn't it?
Like, why would somebody prestige?
I remember actually literally asking that question to our roommate Dan. So he was the one that played that game more, and I was he got me into it, and we would play together, and that's why I would play it. And I remember literally because when you reach max level in multiplayer, you have access to everything in the game, right? You can finally unlock all the guns and all the attachments and all the perks. And you prestige and it starts you back over at 1. And I was like, why would you do that? Like, what's the... I don't want to do that. I like the stuff. We worked so hard for this. This took like 10 hours. Like, and so the answer is, I think, twofold. One, it's right there in the name.
It is the prestige.
You will show how many times you prestige in your player card. 2, I think there is just a straight up stick on a. It's just fine. Do it again, and people will. That's enough, actually.
Yeah.
Fine. Just give me another bar to fill. I'm not filling the bar anymore. I just wanted to fill a bar.
Isn't that interesting?
It's like so basic. It's such a.
We're talking like programmatically. It's literally a number.
Oh
it's just a number.
Oh yeah,
you're just increasing
arbitrary.
A counter.
Oh yeah, but we love seeing that fill up. Even if you're taking away things, like you remove part of the game.
Yeah, but I got a prestige level.
I know exactly. Isn't that fascinating?
It
now
is.
I get to fill the bar again, and give a sense of accomplishment. That's so powerful. Anyway, so there's that, and then the last part. At least with that, they give you some semblance of New Game Plus E kind of mode where when you prestige, you get a token and you get to unlock one thing permanently. No matter how many times so if you prestige enough times, in theory, you could unlock everything.
Right, and then you can't prestige anymore.
300 prestiges, but yeah. So that if you have a gun you really love, then you can use that permanently.
From a developer effort standpoint, it's sheer brilliance.
Oh god, yeah.
Like you're making the player do so much work, and you have had to do so little work.
You've multiplied the game at least 5 to 6 times, literally.
Yeah.
The full multiplayer experience for no work.
Exactly. And like
for a number.
I would take a system like that over loot boxes.
Absolutely.
Any day. I really would.
Again, like I said, like Call of Duty gets a lot of flack, and I think very rightly so, but the good entries are good, and there's a reason they were successful. I mean, honestly, Modern Warfare 2, Modern Warfare 1 was beginning, and then Black Ops 1 and 2 I maintain are excellent games. And yeah, they were. The progression was, and honestly, I didn't play for the progression either. I was very rarely playing to unlock the next thing or to really find a new build. It was really the gameplay was really fun and really engaging, and it was fun to get good at.
Just
and then
poning noobs.
It was eventually it got to that point. It was crazy. I finally got to the point. This is for most first-person shooters, particularly Call of Duty, had a pretty high level of lethality where you would, if someone got the jump on you, were just dead. You just die immediately. Yeah. And especially if you didn't know the maps. Call of Duty is far more about knowing maps than really the gunplay. The gunfights tend to be really short, and you either kind of have good aim or you don't, and that's easy enough to fix.
Right.
But there is I remember when that finally changed, and I finally got it, and I'd learned most of the maps in the pool, and I had a good gun and a good strategy, and I began being the person who would kill me, right? Where I'd get like 8 or 9 kills in a life. And I was like, wow, these guys suck. And I was like, no, they don't suck. You just been playing for 20 hours and you know the map. Like,
right.
It just feels so different. So I was in fact poning noobs there for a second or two. I remember the only other first person shooter I got super into was Titanfall, the original Titanfall. And I loved that game. So it was ahead of its time in my opinion, and very unique. And it was the same thing. When I finally figured Titanfall out, I could just run the map. By the first time I got over 100 points in one match, and it was like, I took a picture. I still have that picture on my phone, actually. I sent it to Dan. So I was so proud. But
what's the end game like in Titanfall?
It's very similar to the Call of Duty. I haven't played 2, which is apparently a absolutely fantastic game, very underrated. But in 1, the end game was in large part. It was similar where you had, it wasn't quite as big of a grind. It wasn't quite as deep a system as like the Call of Duty games. There wasn't as much to unlock. There was less guns and only 2 attachments to every gun. You had the Titans and guns for them, but that only had a little bit. I think in large part the end game for them, like they didn't have a prestige system. The end game was, at least what kept you playing, was a card system actually, which if anyone has been playing Battlefront 2 is making you wince, but it's very different. You would get these, they call them burn cards, where you would do certain achievements, certain things that you're grinding for, and they would give you certain, basically, power-ups that you could put into place at the beginning of, when you could get 3 for one game, one match, and when you die, you could activate one, and you had it for that life, and then when you died, you were done.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't horribly game-breaking. Some of them were very powerful, but they weren't horribly game-breaking in the way that a lot of the stuff we've talked about with Battlefront 2 was. They'd be like, you could see everyone on the map, which was really powerful, or get more EXP from killing grunts, or do more damage with grunts, or give an amped weapon, right? Like just a better weapon than the one, or a weapon with a different firing mode or something like that. And in large part, a lot of those achievements, it was a lot of bars to fill. Similarly, there's no prestige system, like I said, but that would, at least when you completed a challenge, you would get one of these special burn cards, and then you could use that in the match. And that was all right. I actually didn't really play for that reason. I played because that was just a fun freaking game, man. The movement was so cool. You got to play a giant robot and murder people.
What's not to love?
Seriously, man. I mean, that was a lovely, lovely game. So the end game there was far more built around earning things that you'd use and then lose, so you could get more of them.
Right. So
they were consumables.
Exactly. So there's always kind of something to do there.
Mm-hmm, yep. And to be fair, no one, like, that was very, very minor. In fact, maybe you could only use one a match. Yeah, maybe you could use 3. Anyway, point is, most of the time you were not getting beaten by someone because of a burn card.
Right. It was sort of fun for you to use.
Usually it was the very first, like, everyone would spawn with one, and you'd all be doing crazy stuff, and then everyone would die, and then it would reset, and you wouldn't keep on doing
normally.
it. Yeah. But the point is, you could technically actually buy those. You could buy packs with money. I never once even thought about that. There's plenty of in-game currency. You get them for doing damn near anything. So that was, I think, a great example of a decent microtransactional system, in that I never even crossed my mind. I played a lot of that game too. So.
Well, it seems like when talking about endgames, there's a couple themes that have come up in our discussion. Mm-hmm. One is there's like this major mode shifting that can happen in the game, like an MMO, where your focus shifts from increasing in level to getting gear and doing raids and things like that.
Right.
Then there's
different
also,
goals. Yeah.
and in single player, there's a shift from doing something narratively to either like a celebration of the mechanics and like your mastery of them, or yeah, I guess maybe that's it. I'm not sure if they can fall into another category.
I think the New Game Plus thing kind of assumes, I guess that's the same thing, where you're using all the same stuff you had, but you're just getting to do it earlier and better and more, and it's assuming that you're good at it now, so it's a little bit harder.
And it does, to your point, it allows developers to put in difficulty curves that are just beyond the normal game.
Yeah.
Like, and in a way that kind of gets them off the hook from having to put some sort of a narrative spin on it.
Right.
Like, if at the end of an RPG, you beat the game, you complete all the quests, you fight the last boss, cool, and now they give you 30 manticores to fight, and they're all just increasing in difficulty.
Right.
Like, from like a design asset standpoint and story standpoint, there's no way to like work that into the game, and it's kind of lazy. It's like, it's just another manticore, but it's harder.
Oh.
But if it's end game, and you're like saying, I want to see how far I can get, and like how many of these I can down before I die. Exactly. Then it's like, oh, this is interesting.
Well, that's an interesting point too, because like that brings you. Yeah, that's. I need to think about that for a second. You can keep on talking if you want.
1 second has elapsed.
I know. Anyway, you can keep on going.
Yeah. Well, so those seem like the predominant themes to me when we're talking about end games here, and I do think it's brilliant for games to keep track of a percentage of how much of the game that you've done, and then it sort of screams at you once you've completed the game, quote unquote. You complete the game and then you look at that percentage and it's like 43%.
Yeah.
And
you're
it's just like,
what?
I know, right? It's almost like you feel offended.
Bull, yeah, you son of a bitch. Like,
I went all the way through this.
I know, yeah, exactly.
I jumped on K. Rool's face.
I beat him in 9 rounds of boxing. However many rounds you have to friggin' beat him in the first DK.
Donkey Kong
Do you remember
64
that?
and 60.
The original Donkey Kong 64?
Yeah, I do remember that. It was kind of a cool boss fight, actually.
Ridiculous. Well, you have to beat him with every member of the family.
Exactly.
Right?
That's
so
why
it's
it was
at least 5 rounds. Is that 5?
Cool.
DK, Diddy, the girl, the lanky, and the
Chunky.
big one. Chunky.
Yeah,
okay.
I think it's 5.
Can I really? The only one I can't remember is the girl. That hurts.
Tiny.
Yeah.
It's tiny.
Sure. I never played that game, to
really?
be fair. No. I mean, I remember watching, I had one friend who had an N64, and my cousin, actually.
Tiny, lanky, Diddy, Donkey, and Chunky.
Nice. Yeah. I remember their guns, right? Like, okay, so Donkey Kong had just like a normal gun that was like a coconut. Diddy had the pistols, which were peanuts. Lanky had like a long rifle that shot like grapes or something.
Yep.
Chunky had a bazooka that shot pineapples. Mm-hmm. And Tiny had a like Tommy gun.
Yep.
Yeah.
That
what? Shot. Oh shit! What? Or shoot. Peanuts.
Feathers.
Of course.
Yeah. Anyway. Okay. Well, we've really gone off the rails here. So.
So yeah, those themes definitely seem to be in. It seems like end games are a necessity for as long as games have been around. Right? I don't think we can lay this at the feet of our corporate overlords.
No. And I think that they're kind of a fun thing for people to add into their games.
I mean, honestly, when we're talking about games in general, we tend to talk about them in pretty high broad terms, but at the end of the day, it is something that you're doing for entertainment and for enjoyment and for the love of what you're doing. And to that end, of course, having more game to the game is going to be something that's desirable. Well, people will want. If it's a good game, you want more of that game.
Right.
You know, like when I finished I remember when I finished God of War 3, I didn't want to stop playing. I wanted more, and they didn't have any more because it's really hard to make games.
Right. Yeah.
So they gave me a challenge mode, and then I played through it on hard again, and then that was enough, and I was done. But I needed more. You know.
Right.
Because it was so fun and it was so well put together and so fluid, and I'd just gotten good at it, right? Like I just finished.
Exactly.
I was like, okay, what's next?
People love doing things that they're competent at.
Yeah.
Like that is,
sure.
It's fun for people to be good at something. And so to give them a chance to show off how good they are at something, like people, of course, they like that.
And I wonder if grinds get really annoying when you've done that and then you're just doing like for God of War, it didn't feel like a grind because it was something else harder that I was utilizing, and I gotten good at. Now I got to use the thing I was good at. I think a grind is when, or at least a bad grind is when you have reached the point where it's not hard anymore. You're not utilizing your skills in a new way. You're not learning. You're not problem solving. You're just doing the same thing over and over. Yeah. And it's just a chore.
And I think there's some of that's like an execution piece. Like if it just doesn't feel, if it doesn't feel technically good, like, man, I am good at this. Like I enjoy playing single player matches in the new Super Smash Brothers for the 3DS as Yoshi because like I feel like I can string together like such like tight combos and just like do some
and when you land one, it feels fantastic.
Yeah, doing like some really fun maneuvering.
Yeah.
And it's just like I'm like watching myself. I'm like, I am good at this.
Yeah.
And it's fun.
Yeah.
And like that doesn't feel like a grind to me, even though I'm just playing single player matches over and over again.
Right.
I can do that for like an hour or two.
Yeah, same thing. I mean, just again that visceral feeling playing Shadows of Mordor when I played that. Why I put 250 hours into that, mass majority of which was not any like that game, even to 100% in terms of do all the side quests and stuff. Oh, we didn't talk about side quests.
That's true.
That's all right. Even to do that is, I don't know, like 40 hours tops, maybe 30. It's an easy game. It's a real easy game. Maybe like 25. And so it's hundreds of hours of it. Just it feeled so good, guys. Felt so good to murder murder orcs. My inner sociopath is showing.
Yes.
No. The combat felt so good. And actually, I was just playing it a little bit ago with Xander. Has it on Steam. And we pulled it up, and he just got a new Steam Link, which just basically is a Chromecast for Steam.
Yeah,
we can play it on the TV.
That's
right?
awesome.
So yeah, it was really cool, and he was playing it, and I was just like, oh, it's so fun to the combat's so satisfying. Same thing with Arkham and a lot of those action games where the combat is just so fun. God of War is the same thing, to just murder things. Not about killing them, but just like the combat is so satisfying.
Yeah, exactly.
And just makes you feel good. It's just viscerally pleasing. Unlike Doki Doki.
Which was not viscerally pleasing.
There's nothing.
Right.
I could not give any visceral enjoyment to that game.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned Doki Doki, because we're going to take the last 7 minutes here to just talk about our favorite moments in gaming over 2017. This is the end of 2017.
Goodness.
We're going to give it a good send-off. I'm going to see if I can come up with some good gaming memories for
On
y'all.
the spot here. Oh, Lord.
So I'll start with a good memory that is actually pre-podcast, and that is when I came to visit Greg. Actually, this may have been 2016. Was this what? Because I stayed at your place last year.
It was
for
into the
Christmas.
new year.
It was into the new year. Okay.
Yeah,
Well, I'll mention it for 2017 then. We, our friend Xander, who's appeared on this podcast a couple of times, was playing Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door. And we started doing voiceovers for all of the characters.
Yeah, it's all written. It's incredibly really very character filled characters. But there's no voice acting. It's all just written dialogue, and so it's just begging to be voiced over.
Yeah.
And neither of us are particularly skilled. Actually, what was the one voice you killed? I couldn't do it. I was so impressed. What was it?
Swedish Chef.
Yeah. Wait, was that it?
I think so.
I remember that was good. There's another one that I feel like you just were so much better than me at. And there's maybe one or two that I was decent at, but in large part it was just two friends goofing off, getting to do the voices. And we actually did that after you left too.
Yeah, we did it remotely.
We did it. We
watched a Let's Play on mute, and we did the voices.
Oh god, that's
just goes to show, guys. There's more than one way to play with games.
There really is. That was fun. We did that for we watched 14 parts of that.
I know.
We probably did that for a good 3 to 5 hours worth of total time.
Did I tell you that my roommates heard me doing those voices and were like, "What the heck is going on in there?" Yeah. It was wonderful.
Yeah. Oh god, that was fantastic. I wish we could talk about Dark Souls. That was definitely 2016.
Yeah, that's true.
But that was really fun. Where Mark just came in and it was here for 3 or 4 days.
Yeah, it was a
while. And
while.
we were like, I don't know. So we just went to GameStop and we're just looking. We were like, let's get a game. Let's get an old game, like a cheap game, and play it. And so they had a copy of Dark Souls for $10, and we were like, oh my god, yeah, let's do that. And we spent good 15, 20 hours on that. And
we had a really good time.
Oh yeah, we loved it. It was great. And
I feel like we saw a decent amount of the game too. And
yeah. Actually, I have no idea how much we saw. I think we might be an eighth of the way through the game.
Yeah.
But regardless, we saw a lot, and it was great. I would say this year I think was in large part honestly defined for me by 2 games. One of which
Say
you know what it is?
I think so.
Our perennial whipping dog.
Oh, Diablo 3.
Diablo friggin' 3, man. I did play a lot of that this year.
Oh, no.
This is the first time I actually tried to get a new stash tab in Diablo, which is just a seasonal thing that you do, and it requires a lot. And so I actually went over with another friend, Dave.
Dave. Just Dave.
Yep. And would go over to his house, and he came here a few times, and we would have a little mini LAN party and try to beat a rift in under 2 minutes and all the really difficult stuff and I didn't do it actually.
You didn't get the stash
I did all the hard stuff. There's one last thing I needed to do that was super easy, and I just didn't put in the time.
And the season ended?
And the season ended.
Oh, dude, that's brutal.
Yeah. Dave and I did these really difficult, a rift in under 2 minutes. He was way over leveled too for me. And we we ran it for 2 hours until we finally got the perfect amount of enemies and
oh my gosh.
and I had all this gear and I put in all the my seasonal character was better than anything I'd ever done before and it was ideal and it was the worst. I never finished it. So Diablo 3 took a lot. The other one, Blizzard, took a lot of my time. Obviously this year, I played a lot of Overwatch with Xander this year, which was a lot of fun. And it was the first time I've really been into a multiplayer online game really that much. Whereas the primary thing I was playing, oh yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
So Xander and I shared hundreds of hours on Overwatch with many, many fond stories. One of my favorites was was we had a guy who Xander would throw into chat, either voice chat or text, kind of get a hoorah, just to see who would respond. And there was one guy who was so into it, was just playing ball that every single time he'd get a kill or anything. And he turned out to be like the MVP by far, and like carried us through. It was the dumbest thing, and he won. And then anyway, so we added him as a friend, and then he it was so painful. This one time we logged on and we got a message from him saying like, "Hey, do you want to play a game?" And we were like, "Hey, it's the guy, it's the right guy." And then he said literally, "Sorry, wrong person," and then logged off.
Oh no!
It was so brutal.
That's
It
hilarious.
was horrid.
Oh my goodness.
But and then Journey was another really, really great game, and I have been replaying some classics, some of my old favorites in terms of Arkham City, replaying Darksiders, which I'm really excited about right now.
One game that I played this year that was new to me that I'd seen my roommate play in the previous year was Factorio. And I've never had a game that I think I thought about, not this year anyway, as much offline as Factorio. Because I was like, I would just arrange things inefficiently.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I had this problem where like everything was clogged up on one conveyor belt. And
Yeah.
I was like, how are you supposed to do this? Like this doesn't make sense to me.
Well, you're built for that too. That's just
I
where your
know.
mind works anyway, man.
I love trying to solve those little like
Yeah.
efficiency problems
yeah,
and
it
like
sounds like custom
realizing
built for
you
you.
had to use both sides of the conveyor belt and like
Yeah.
you could use certain filtering grabbers in order to make things more efficient. Like there's just so many little mental puzzles to solve in that game
Surprised
with
you-
how you lay out your factories.
Yeah, I'm surprised you like 8 during that time period.
I did probably spend a couple of days not taking care of myself playing Factorio.
Yeah,
That was
I believe that.
it was fun, but it probably got to be a little too much at points. But
What else you got?
Doki Doki Literature
Oh,
Club,
Doki. Yeah,
dude.
we have to talk about Doki. Just the whole month of
The whole
October.
yeah, that's
in
true.
retrospect, was some of my favorite gaming experiences ever.
It was ridiculous.
Honestly, and I would say Doki Doki, again, not just to toot our own horn, but like that, just experience getting to do it with Mark and Xander too.
It was.
And play through a whole game together as the three of us was, I think, one of my favorite gaming experiences I've ever had.
And me too.
And
a fantastic game to do remotely like that.
Yeah,
Like-
almost ideal, right? Like, can't think of
Yeah.
a better game to do like remotely like that. Where it was, like I didn't lose any of the. It would be the same thing if I had been sitting next to you. You know, like there was
Yeah,
no.
exactly.
I lost almost no experience there, getting to do that. So, yeah, the ups and downs, the sheer ludicrousy of it, the fact that I had to convince you guys to
And then-
do it, and we thought we were being trolled.
Yeah, after you
the first
convinced
90
us, we spent 3 hours.
Well, no, it's
and-
3 hours. It wasn't even. Yeah, it was like.
Yeah.
And again, we took a week between that, but what we didn't see is that I was legitimately stressed out that I had just completely lost all of my cred online, and we had just streamed 3 grown men playing a horrible dating sim, anime game, and that I had just gotten duped.
And we did do that, but it turned into a horror game, which
We
was
did,
great.
yep, and then eventually it delivered in the best worst way possible, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know, it really
It was
really followed
memorable.
through.
It was very
And for what's worth, we were on the front edge of that crap. Like we were. That was like week of release, I think, or maybe not week of release, but week of Steam release.
That's I think it's fitting that we were on the front edge of that for two guys who talk a lot about games that are a few years old.
Yeah, right. That we're talking about like, what are you playing? Mostly
Dark
Arkham City.
Souls.
Yeah.
Like, I'm playing
Games
this
from 2011.
playing this new game called
It's this new Skyrim game.
it's called Pole Position.
Yeah.
It's it was a really early Nintendo game. But
Well, we talked about doing Mass Effect. Like
That's true,
the original
yeah, we
Mass
were doing
Effect
Mass
from
Effect.
2009, if that.
anyway, we'll wrap this up.
Yeah.
Happy New Year and happy holidays from the Gaming Mechanics.
Absolutely.
We will see you all in 2018. We'll be starting a series on platformers. We'll be starting a series. We'll be starting a series on milkshake cats.
We'll be starting a series on.
We'll be starting a series on games the transition in gaming from
let's do that.
2D,
Yep, 2D to 3D.
3D.
Yep, and how that affected things.
And
We'll
then
start
back
with
again.
platformers.
Yes, and we'll talk about platformers.
Oh yeah, we could talk about there's all kinds of stuff we can talk about there.
That's what we'll be doing starting next week.
Yeah,
basically.
yep.
So
Come 2018.
Yeah, and we'll probably the next episode will be live as well. So if you noticed a little something special in this episode, there will be that again next episode.
Wait, why? What?
All right, good night,
We'll
guys.
talk. All right, see you guys.
If you enjoyed this episode of Gaming Mechanics, check out our Twitter @GamingMechanics or Facebook by going to facebook.com/gamingmechanics. Thanks for listening.